So my girls' behavior has always been challenging, and has become increasingly so with age. As babies, they were always needing to be held and engaged. Otherwise, they were crying or screaming. As they became toddlers, they were climbing and throwing and hitting and, eating things they shouldn't have been eating. A lot of risk-taking behaviors that continued as they became preschoolers. And some added behaviors there were, running away in public places, climbing things with absolutely no ability to get down. One time, one of my daughters jumped in a swimming pool and she did not know how to swim and she had no floaties on. She just jumped right in. Um, and slowly they moved into what I used to call defiant behavior. And that grew increasingly unsafe, mean, destructive, and violent. Everything was a battle, and every interaction had me on edge. I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is not a fun way to live. Early on, I realized that something wasn't quite right, or at least my gut told me that something wasn't quite right. I did read literally every parenting book I could find. A parenting approach that focused on connection was really always my go-to. However, I found that as my girls got older and their behaviors got more challenging, it was really hard to maintain that approach. Because I was trying desperately to make them better, teach them how to be good, so that life wasn't so hard, trying to figure out how to make life less hard. And as suggested by numerous experts along the way, I tried a myriad of approaches that focused on changing their behaviors through rewards and punishments or consequences. Some would work for a moment, but eventually they all failed. And most often, they escalated their challenging behaviors. So one of the things I also want to share, because I also think this is important for folks with young children, or folks working with parents with young children, is that, again, I knew something wasn't quite right in my gut early on, but my girls were really smart, very verbal, and looked normal, quote unquote. And so nobody really would listen to me when I said, oh, I don't know what's going on. Something doesn't seem right. And they would say things like, oh, they're just strong-willed, or, give me lots of parenting advice. So what I started doing is blaming myself. I wasn't a good enough parent. What in the world was I doing wrong? Why couldn't I parent them? What's wrong with me? And that, is not where we want to be as parents. When my girls got kicked out of preschool at age 4, for defiant behavior, we finally began the journey towards answers. Finally, we had to do something. Somebody had to help us. They were diagnosed with ADHD at 5 and autism and ODD also at age 6. And I think there was, a lot surrounding those diagnoses in terms of emotions and feelings of relief and, oh my gosh, what does this mean for them and for us? But it still didn't lead to answers necessarily. It led to a lot more questions. And the combination of their diagnoses was tricky. And so, most of the supports that were wrapped around us focused on ADHD or autism, not their brains. So now we had diagnoses, but again, still no clear answers on how to help them. So about a year later, after continuing to read every book I could find, I was introduced to the neurobehavioral approach. And it just made so much sense. So as I continued to read and research, and I found Eileen, and thanks to her coaching and my continued sort of educating myself around this model, I began to really understand just what Eileen was sharing, that lagging skills was behind their bad behavior or their difficult behavior. And that their behavior was not willful. I may think that sort of kids do well when they can. That shift in how I thought about my girls was critical. It was a hard and long shift. It did not happen overnight. But once it shifted, I just began to see them differently. And then I could start to do the work that needed to be done, mostly on me, in changing how I interacted with them.